This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Get on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host, Carl Dumler, and with me as always, I have my co-host and good friend, Mr. Nick Kendell, and we are once again also joined by Mr. Erick Trickel. Gentlemen, good to have you again. It's so fun to talk football with you guys. So I'm excited to talk once again and get a little bit more info and inside information and thoughts on the coaching staff and so much more that we're going to be talking about here today. But gentlemen, how's your evening going?
Well, we got to spend a little bit more time with Eric and you, so not too bad talking football. I was actually on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast earlier, so I've been talking football for a long time today, and the Senior Bowl going on, trying to follow that. So I'm not at football overload yet. I don't think that'll ever happen, honestly. But I am probably going to be sleeping, talking football. And the fiance, she loves me. She loves the Hawkeyes. She loves the Broncos. But she's probably, if I'm saying it in my sleep tonight, she might give me a smack. And I wouldn't be surprised.
Eric, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing actually really well. Thankfully that I was sick yesterday and I've been able to kick that little bug that I had and feeling great.
That's great to hear. Well, we want to let you know to make sure to follow us on Twitter. You can follow me at Carl Dumler MHH, and of course Nick at Nick Kendell MHH, and you can also follow Eric at Erick Trickel. You can follow the podcast Twitter account at Huddle Up Pod, and make sure you subscribe to our show and leave us a rating as we value your input on our show. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of the 24/7 Sports and the CBS Sports Digital, to find ours and our co-writers' articles and all things pertaining to your Denver Broncos. This podcast is powered by Overtime Media. Well, like I said, we're welcoming back our guest, Erick Trickel, and we just want to thank you for joining us once again. And there's a couple topics that I'm excited to get to talk to you about. We haven't really got much of a time to chat, you and I, about some of this. But, I mean, I know it's been kind of a whirlwind for the last couple of weeks for the Broncos, and I'm told that they're going to interview the new coordinators on Thursday. But I just wanted to get your opinion. What do you think about these coaching hires? What have you liked about what the Broncos have done?
I like the new focus that they've had with these coaching hires. I did a whole article on it, and it was just kind of brief simply because I found myself repeating everything over and over again like I tend to do on podcasts. But anyways, it's the fact that they're focusing on fundamentals and technique. Every single coach that they've hired has a big emphasis on those two key aspects of developing players and getting more out of veteran players. It's fundamentals and technique. That's what really helps you win on the football field, no matter what position. You can be a supreme athlete all you want, but if you don't have the fundamentals or the technique down, then you're going to be limited at the impact you're able to have. And I also love the fact that we finally have coaches and a head coach that will hold players accountable.
I kept thinking of his comment of death by inches when I was watching that Chiefs-Patriots game and that offsides penalty by D. Ford. I mean, that's the difference between going to the Super Bowl and not. And it's just crazy how much like that death by inches is actually a very, very true statement when it comes to the NFL.
I feel like he kind of stole that from the what was the movie with The Replacements or whatever? The one with the coach, he's like, gives the speech, it's inches.
Any Given Sunday.
Any Given Sunday, that's the one. Inches. I could just see, I think it was Al Pacino even. So it didn't I mean, they're both the Italian mob, so that's probably where they got it from. But yeah, okay, continue.
No, like I said, it just sometimes it really does come down to those stupid mistakes where the Patriots are known for, we're just not going to beat ourselves, we're going to let you beat yourself. And I mean, that stuck really out there in that Chiefs game for sure. But and so that is, I mean, the Broncos this last year, lots of penalties, lots of miscommunications, lots of just stupid things that you're just sitting there shaking your head going, come on, guys. I mean, this is killing every single drive. We'd get something going and all of a sudden, holding call or false start or, I don't know. I mean, the list can go on, of course, of all the different penalties. And so finally having a coaching staff that can definitely nip that in the bud is something I'm definitely looking forward to.
Here's a fun fact talking about death by inches and you mentioning that D Ford offsides. I remember reading an article and Chicago only had like 4 or 5 offside penalties all year.
Good luck, Von Miller.
Yeah. Because didn't he have like 3 in one game?
Yeah, I think
he has quite a bit.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to completely stop him from wanting to try to guess the snap count because it does lead to a lot of big plays for sure. But it's definitely, you got to be smart about it. You got to pick your moments to try to get something like that. But I guess on the opposite side of that, then what has you concerned about this coaching staff?
Eric?
The lack of experience is probably my biggest concern. The new head coach, first time being a head coach, defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, a lot of people first time there. I think that it was smart of them to give some other veteran coaches on these guys to help with these guys at certain spots, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, having a defensive-minded head coach, that's going to help out the defensive coordinator, but Scangarello is kind of all alone, which is one reason why Gary Kubiak wanted a role, was to help mentor a young offensive mind, but the lack of experience. And they were able to pair Scangarello with Mike Munchak, who's going to be able to have a voice. I mean, maybe not on the play calls or the offensive scheme, but be able to just sit there and be a guiding hand for him. And they did a good job of, despite my concern of that, they did a good job of balancing it out with other hires.
Would you agree with that, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like they got a pretty good balance with this coaching staff overall. I mean, perhaps maybe a better known offensive mind than Scangarello, but I mean, overall, I think it's a pretty balanced, good group. And I feel like it's not just a bunch of old farts. You know, it's not Fangio and Kubiak, you know, yelling for people to get off their lawns, which I mean, I'm full support of. I hate people on my lawn, but like I feel like it's a good balance and a lot of different viewpoints. But still, it all goes back to the power structure. Elway's the guy in charge, and then after that, it's Fangio. And I feel like it's I am a little bit worried about, you know, 2 very strong personalities. If things don't go well, kind of going off in the other direction. But overall, I am pretty happy about this coaching staff, and it's hard not to be excited about. You know, you got a young offensive mind coming up. You got Fangio, who, I mean, let's be honest, his press conference just opening was better than anything Vance Joseph ever did as far as press conference goes. He didn't have that kind of just, I don't know, there's just kind of something awkward about Joseph. And so go ahead. Sorry.
Are we sure we can say that? Because Fangio hasn't had a chance to have a great week of practice yet.
That's true. That is very true. And also, he hasn't had the time of his life yet that we know of. But he's in Denver now, so every single day is the time of his life, out of Chicago into Denver. Chicago's not bad either. Great city, but definitely a Denver. I prefer Denver personally. But yeah, no, I can't disagree with any of that. I'm very excited about this coaching staff, but still, like, that's part of the deal. Now they got to fix this roster and keep improving there, and obviously find a quarterback. But that's a whole other argument.
Well, and speaking of quarterback, then I would say the one final search for coach is quarterback coach. Eric, have you been hearing anything about guys that they're looking at or anything that you could maybe share with us here today?
I haven't heard a single name mentioned as a guy that they're actually looking at. I've heard a couple guys that are considered highly respected among NFL circles, but no names that they're actually looking at. And the most popular name I've heard is Marcus Brady. I believe he's the assistant quarterbacks coach for the Indianapolis Colts.
When do you expect them to maybe find that guy?
I think they want to sit down and really talk with Scangarello about it. I could see them probably not this week. I think the focus is on specifically the Senior Bowl this week, but I think they'll end up finding a guy next week.
They should just bring back Jake Plummer.
He actually would make a good coach.
Coaches, I don't know about his film work personally, but people respect him. He's still a guy in Denver that's really liked him. I mean, if they're bringing back Chris Cooper, you know, Jake Plummer would be a guy I'd love to bring back and somehow be involved in the Denver Broncos organization. I still rock a Jake Plummer jersey, to be completely honest. That was my dude.
He was a fun one to watch, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, now let's switch to a little bit of the roster itself, because that's what you said. You got to find players that fit this roster now. But who are some players that are already on this staff or on this roster that you actually think are a good fit with the new coaching staff? And this is to both of you guys on this one.
I'll kick it to Eric first since he's the guest.
No, go ahead and take it. I got to respond to an email.
Well, I think the big thing will be, it's really hard to say on offense because are we going to be doing Mike Munchak and apparently what Fangio wants with more power scheme, or how does that translate to what Scangarello is going to do as the Shanahan West Coast offense zone blocking scheme? That's two different kind of schemes there, and I'm not sure exactly which direction they're going to go. I mean, Scangarello seems like a guy who can take on multiple influences, so that's one thing to look for. But I really am not sure about the offense's direction as far as play calling, blocking scheme up front. One thing I am sure of with listening to Scangarello and also what Elway said is they're going to be an offense that wants to take more vertical shots. So I guess I would say is they need to find a wide receiver that can win down the field. I know Cortland Sutton's solid down the field as far as if you can isolate him one-on-one, he can out-jump anybody, make it a 50-50 ball, an 80-20 ball. But they really need to find an eventual guy that can replace Emmanuel Sanders as far as a guy who can take the top off the defense any play. That kind of guy is not on this roster as far as a young guy. I mean, Deshaun Hamilton's kind of that Z and that slot type ability. He can run a multitude of routes, get some separation, but he's not taking the top off the defense.
Right.
Tim Patrick is kind of a 9-route guy. He's a big athlete, a guy like that, but I still don't think he's a guy who a ball tracker down the field, pushing the top. You have to have a safety leaning that way because he's such a deep threat. And Sutton obviously not a burner either. So really would like a guy that could bring more of that explosive ability down the field. And I think based on Scangarello saying, forget about wanting to push the ball down the field more. He said it's a non-negotiable thing. You have to take vertical shots. So that's something I'm looking for. On defense, obviously everything changes. It's something I need to write an article about this. I know you're still going to get it in your tweets and mentions every single week, but cornerback is not as valuable in the Fangio scheme at least not as you can use 3 great cornerbacks to cover up linebacker and safety. Safety and linebacker are more important than they've been in Denver in a long time, and cornerback is less important. The responsibilities are covered to all of them. So Fangio, big zone, ball skills, eyes in the backfield, and tackling ability. Guys like Greedy Williams moving down the board, scheme fit-wise. Guys like DeAndre Baker moving up the board. So that kind of thing, but also more athleticism and coverage ability at linebacker.
It always amazes me. I keep reading all these mock drafts, as I know you do too. How many people keep mocking Greedy Williams to the Broncos? And yeah. All I keep thinking is you have no clue what kind of coaching staff and scheme that we're running here in Denver. And I had somebody say, well, these are the exact kind of corners that the Broncos have drafted in the past. I said, but that was the past. This is a whole new coaching staff. This is a whole new scheme. There's a big difference between Wade Phillips and Vic Fangio. And but it just seems to kind of go over people's heads. They just see, Broncos need cornerback. Greedy Williams, he's got the highest ceiling of any cornerback in this draft. Yep, let's just stick him there. And so, I mean, we're going to talk about some fits here in a little bit about that cornerback position. But, I'm kind of with you that people need to start thinking about this team a little bit differently of who's important and what roles play a bigger role than they have in the past for the Broncos.
The good news is that with Mike Munchak coaching the offensive line, basically he can make anybody fit. It doesn't matter what scheme he's running. He does such a good job of being able to coach little, I don't want to say cheats into technique and stuff like that to help, but that's basically what it is he just coaches things that can help you cover up other weaknesses and be able to fit in every scheme. So that I'm not overly concerned about. I've heard that they want to do a little bit more zone stuff up front, which also is beneficial to most of these offensive linemen. There's one guy who we'll probably talk about here in a little bit. But as you said, they need to find a guy who can be that threat to take the top off. Maybe if they had Isaiah McKenzie back again, they can sit there and do that. But just kidding on McKenzie because the dude can't hold on to a ball.
I was going to say.
My tongue.
But they could use a guy that can do that. I think that I think there's other ways you can, push that ball downfield, as you mentioned with Cortland Sutton. I think there's a bunch of receivers who can help you bring that similar kind of skill set on the other side. But there's definitely some guys who can help take that top off the defense and replace what Emmanuel Sanders brings. But these running backs, they fit. I've heard a lot of talk that they're doing away with fullback, so bye-bye Andy Janovich.
Oh, wow.
Sorry, Carl.
Oh, man, that's my doppelganger right there.
And then tight ends. Tight ends are hard because if they're going to require them to block more, then they don't have a single guy on roster who fits. But they also need guys who are going to be able to be a threat as a receiver, and that's where these guys do fit. So they definitely need help there. But I believe the strongest position that they have as they transition over to this new scheme offensively is definitely the running backs. I mean, and that's just not talking about their abilities as individuals. It's just talking about the fact that they can be versatile in what they do. And then defensively, basically, there's not much changes on the defensive side up front anyways. I mean, so the defensive line, the edge rushers, those rush linebackers, they're not going to be affected by it. But Todd Davis, Josie Jewell, you got to upgrade those. You don't need as much help at the corner position. And I believe the scheme switch is going to help Isaac Yadam quite a bit. And then they got to find somebody to move Justin Simmons over because how Fangio uses his strong side safety just does not work very well with Justin Simmons. So
I know this is crazy, but if this was Madden, I would really toy with the idea of maybe moving Simmons to boundary corner because he's got length, he's got quick twitch, he's got fluidity. He doesn't necessarily have long speed. He's a solid tackler, actually. I think maybe not as much in the middle of the field, but I feel like he'd have a chance. I mean, he feels like one of those Seattle cornerbacks that they take in the 5th round as a safety and they move him. They're like, oh, wow, he really works for this cover 3 scheme. Is there any talk about that, or am I totally off my rocker there, off in Madden fantasy land?
I believe, and from what I've heard, is that the only talk about moving Justin Simmons isn't to corner. Maybe they'll bring him down and use him in the slot, but it's basically been strictly moving him to where he's more comfortable in that free role. Okay.
Interesting. All right. Well, I know that he's a versatile guy, and I still believe in the athleticism and the length from the tools. Just wasn't sure. And because his biggest issue coming out of school was long speed. Frame was an issue as well. He was kind of a scrawny guy, but long speed was a big one. So I was curious about that. So, all right. Thanks for asking. Thanks for answering that. I was curious.
All right. Well, let's then move on to who are some players you don't think are a great fit and could be looking for work elsewhere? Because I mean, that's always one of the big things is you make this coaching change. There's going to have to be some changes, and there's just going to be some guys that fit well with the last coaching staff that don't fit well with this coaching staff. So is there anybody that really sticks out in that sense?
Case Keenum.
Jake's.
If you want to push the ball downfield, Case Keenum's not your guy. I mean, he can do it decently when you're moving the pocket. I mean, we saw a few times of that this last year, but he's just not consistent enough to stand in the pocket and deliver downfield. So Denver's, they want to push that. They're focusing on trying to find a different quarterback, Joe Flacco. And another guy is Ron Leary. He's a guy, if they want to go more zone stuff, I don't see his fit up front. He's definitely more of a power guy. Plus, dude's missed 15 games in 2 seasons. So, I mean, he's not worth how much he's getting paid either.
Right.
Is there anything with the injury clause there?
With Leary?
Yeah, because he's coming off that Achilles. Is there a potential that he has some sort of...
I haven't heard anything about an injury clause with Leary. There is one with Sanders.
Okay. All right. I had heard some rumblings that there was one with Leary.
I mean, there might be. I just haven't heard it.
Okay. I was just curious there. Because in an ideal world, you can move on from him without really having to worry about it. But I wasn't sure if that was the case. So, okay. And if that's the case, maybe Ramon Foster, the guy that's been with Munchak for the Steelers for a bit now. One it makes a lot of sense. Bring him right in.
Crazy how that works.
Get your guys, man, if you're comfortable. I mean, that's what Kubiak tried to do. Doesn't always work, though.
All right. Well, one final question here on the coaching hires, and this is more about a divisional opponent because this will be a big hire. Are you hearing anything about the Chiefs and who they might target for the defensive coordinator after letting go of Bob Sutton?
The popular report is Rex Ryan, and he definitely has some interest in returning back to coaching. But I personally wouldn't go that route if I were them. I know that he doesn't run the same front as Kansas City likes to run or have the personnel to do, But if I'm Kansas City, I'm throwing as much money as it takes to get Chris Richard. Hopefully you can figure out some way to get Dallas to let him go, but that is the guy 100% that I would be looking at if I'm Kansas City to get. This guy is just really smart with his defensive concepts and defensive schemes and how he game plans for opposing offenses, that he is worth getting, and he has a knack for being able to find good talent on the secondary and coaching them up.
Awesome. I mean, maybe not awesome.
I was going to say, come on.
I mean,
you don't need them to be good on both sides of the ball.
Iron sharpens iron, right? They eventually got to pay somebody. Also, they can't keep all that talent.
I know, it's true. Eventually, they're going to come to roost. I mean, there's all that talk now of Mahomes getting that $200 million contract.
Can't wait. Do it today.
All right, well, let's then switch over to a position that a lot of people have been talking about. We talked about it just a little bit here earlier, the cornerback position, because I know a lot of people have been saying the Broncos absolutely have to go get a cornerback sometime, either in the draft or free agency. But who on the draft or who on the roster, do you think is a really good fit here or bad fit with Fangio? I mean, I know there's only a few guys still on the roster right now, but anybody that really sticks out that you think is going to be a huge advantage having Fangio be on the staff?
As I mentioned earlier, Isaac Adam, I think he's going to benefit tremendously from having Fangio and Donatello or whatever the other Ninja Turtles name is that the Denver Broncos have on their staff. But one guy that I'm actually kind of interested to see is Chris Harris, not because he doesn't fit the scheme, but because he kind of has a personality that can be a little bit hard for coaches to deal with. And I mean, we see it on Twitter with things he says and stuff like that. And he's not afraid to be vocal. So that's something that I want to keep an eye on with Fangio. I mean, if they're able to work that out and work just fine, then having Chris Harris, obviously he's still at good value and he fits the scheme so well, but that's something that I definitely want to keep an eye on.
I have a question for you also regards to cornerback. In an ideal situation, you're playing Chris Harris in two cornerback situations as a boundary corner, obviously. However, in nickel and sub packages, are you looking to keep Chris Harris on the outside, or are you looking to move him inside with somebody else on the outside? And I bring this up in regards to Bryce Callahan, who many people are linking to the Broncos. But I think if you're signing Bryce Callahan, you're pretty much almost exclusively using Chris Harris as a boundary corner.
I think it varies depending on team. I don't think there's as many teams anymore where you can't just leave Harris outside, and especially in these three corner situations in the nickel and dime stuff. But it definitely depends on just the situation. I mean, Harris is good enough that he can hang with most receivers in there. The only issue you'd have is getting him stuck on a guy like Julio Jones or a big body receiver. But other than that, I think that, again, he'll work just fine. I think Callahan would come in and they would work just fine, the three of them. But it just depends on who you're playing against.
Okay. And what would you personally rather do? If you could bring in your top three cornerbacks next year, who are they? Ideally. We're not talking about trading for like Jalen Ramsey to be one of them as well, but your top three.
Isaac Adam, Chris Harris, and I think Darqueze Dennard really comes to mind. I mean, but Bryce Callahan, I think, would be the guy that I'd have to go with. Just he knows the system so well, and as you mentioned, this defense isn't so focused on the corner's ability. I think that him being able to help Isaac Adam learn the defense along with Chris Harris and just all that stuff, it just brings a lot more value than whatever issues that you may have of having two smaller corners, because, as I said, you can get by with that. I mean, teams aren't loading up with 2 6'4" receivers on the outside anymore. You tend to have a little bit quicker guy as your second boundary receiver. So
that makes sense.
Well, speaking of I guess cornerbacks or free agent cornerbacks, is there any place for Bradley Roby, or is that just done?
I would assume it's done.
Yeah, it's just done. Denver's ready to move on. I mean, he made a comment about public comment about how he wants to stay here and stay in Denver, but sources I've talked to with inside the team have said that that's not actually accurate. Is that there was a couple times during the season that he mentioned how he wants out. They have issues with the fact that he quit a couple times during games and stuff like that, and just a lot of issues. I think that Denver's just ready to move on.
That makes sense. Okay, well, you talked about free agency already. Who are maybe some cornerbacks in the draft that you would think would be great fits for this defense that the Broncos are rolling out this year?
Nick and I were actually talking about one of the guys that I'm going to mention earlier. I like him quite a bit more than Nick does, and that's Derek Beatty from Kentucky. He's versatile enough to play in any scheme. He doesn't have the ball skills that you want. He's not passive, but he's not overly physical. And the technique is solid. I mean, he did have some issues at the Shrine game, but he's definitely one guy that sticks out as somebody who I would be taking a hard look at and bringing, especially if you get into that fourth round and still need a corner.
I think the ideal guy in the draft, totally outside of where you have to take him, is probably Baker, because he's such a good tackler, processor, and good ball skills and everything like that. He's not a great athlete, but you don't really need that for this scheme. You're not leaving him on an island very often. Just how physical he is at the catch point and coming downhill, I think he's the perfect fit for this scheme. He was a guy that I was really much lower on when we were running this Wade Phillips, Joe Woods system, and now that we're switching over, I'm 10 times higher on Baker, and I'm higher on Murphy too in that regard for this scheme. But that Baker would be the guy, a guy that I'm following on in this. Through this process, a guy that actually I reached out to Eric today. I'm like, okay, you need to ask about this guy because I'm watching him. I've heard good things. He's really impressing me, and that's Justin Lane from Michigan State. And I think he led the country in pass breakups this year. I saw some analytics on him as far as his pass breakups and disrupted catch points, as far as elite cornerbacks in the draft or coming out of the draft and how they do in the NFL. And he's like in the 99th percentile as far as how impactful he is at the catch point, how often he is in the game. He's still a skinny guy. He moved over from wide receiver to cornerback, and he needs to fill out his frame, work on some technique. But I think the tools, the tenacity, and everything there. He's an early declaration as well. But I think he's a guy that's really flying under the radar right now. And I wouldn't be surprised if he ran and tested well. He could be a guy that moves up to the middle of the second round when it's said and done. Also, I'm really curious about the cornerback that I think Ben Albright was tweeting about him earlier today too. The one from Houston. Yes.
Isaiah Johnson?
That's the one. Yes. Length, tenacious. He has to work on some press coverage skills still, but I think he's got upside and length and stuff that you really want for that kind of scheme, and I think the upside to grow is all there. So that's another guy he's like one of the few that was able to stick with David Sills down the field today and cover Deebo Samuel. And if you're able to do that in 1-versus-1s, in drills like this where it's definitely catered because you don't have help up to the top or the inside, that means a lot. So that's a guy I'm watching.
With Isaiah Johnson, if we didn't have the coaching staff we did, I'd totally be off board on him because his biggest issue is that he tends to forget technique and forget his fundamentals and just play. I mean, he knows how to play the position, but when something bad happens, he just kind of loses technique and has a bunch of bad habits. This new coaching staff, I believe that they'd be able to coach that out of him. And another guy is Isaiah Wharton, another big guy, Rutgers guy, that pretty similar, fits the scheme very well, but has some issues with the consistency in his technique. And then Tim Harris from Virginia and Jamel Dean from Auburn, I think are guys that fit pretty well as well.
Jamel Dean, good job. I'm a fan. I remember talking about him way earlier this season, and I know he's got a lot of injury issues and some technique issues, but that length and that ability to fly downhill and make a hit, I am intrigued. Day 3, don't get me wrong, day 3, but he's one that I think I have circled as this could be a dude. So, good call.
Where do you expect maybe the Broncos to actually start looking at cornerback in the draft if that's the way they go?
For me, it's too early to say. It depends on free agency.
A lot of it does depend on free agency. But if Drew Lock, Daniel Jones, and Dwayne Haskins aren't there, I definitely think they'll start to be looking at either trading down or taking a corner there. They'll definitely be keeping their eyes from throughout the draft on corners because they know that it's not as big of a need, but they know that they definitely got to improve there.
Yeah. I feel like the free agency group for cornerback, at least now that we're not looking for actually number one guys who can play man on an island, it has opened up tremendously. So there's a lot of options. I'd be surprised if they didn't bring in at least one cornerback.
Morris Claiborne.
Pierre Desir.
He's a good one who actually would be a good pickup, by the way.
Dude, that's my dude. That's my dude. I hate what he did in the AFC divisional round the AFC wildcard round against Nuke Hopkins, and I'm really intrigued by him.
Kareem Jackson, even though he's kind of a defensive back, Buster Skrine, EJ Gaines,
Nelson with Kansas City.
Nelson. There's definitely a bunch of guys that can come in and fit well with what Denver wants to do. Orlando Scandrick's another one.
Yeah.
So they definitely have their options in free agency to go get a guy who can help out. And if he's healthy, depending on how it is, Kayvon Webster wouldn't be a bad pickup for this scheme either.
Hey, be careful when you're throwing that stuff out there, Eric, because you know how any fan base can be. But I mean, because we're around Broncos country, if you throw around one name that somebody recognizes, it's like a moth to a flame. Everybody's going to be tweeting that now, so be careful with that power you have.
I have unlimited power.
Yeah, like, maybe we should bring back Eric Decker.
We should.
They'll probably be. Oh gosh, get out of here. All right. Well, speaking of getting out of here, I think it's time for us to wrap this episode up. You can find Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH, and find Eric at Erick Trickel, and find myself at Nick Kendell MHH. Also, make sure you head on over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports Digital, to find all our coverage covering the Denver Broncos. Head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and comment. Your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast on iTunes, for Android users, Stitcher. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're out there. You can follow us on Twitter at MyHuddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl Dumler and Erick Trickel, I'm Nick Kendell, wrapping up another episode of Building the Broncos. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you guys soon. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.